For 19 years, Adaeze Nwosu believed she had destroyed a spacecraft. Not damaged it, not delayed it, destroyed it. $1.5 billion of American engineering, 11 years of other people's careers, and one small machine that was supposed to land on Mars and did not. Her name was in the report. Page 91. One paragraph, 4 sentences, and a table number. She was 26 years old. She was wrong. And the proof had been sitting on a magnetic tape in a climate-controlled building in the California desert the entire time, in a box nobody had opened, because nobody had any reason to open a box full of silence. The email arrived on a Tuesday in March, at 11:40 at night, while Adaeze Nwosu was sitting at her kitchen table in Sugar Land, Texas, running a regression suite that would not finish until morning. She was 46 years old. She wore reading glasses now. There was a cup of tea beside her laptop that had gone cold 2 hours earlier, and she drank it anyway, because that was the kind of thing you stopped noticing after 20 years of night work. The subject line said, "Records release. Halcyon. Your name appears in the index." She looked at that word for a long moment. Halcyon. Nobody had said it to her in a decade. It had become one of those words that other people used casually and she did not use at all, the way some people go around a certain block for the rest of their lives. The email was from a woman named Marisol Tejada. She wrote carefully, the way people write when they are not sure whether they are about to do someone a kindness or an injury. She was 29. She worked for a contractor in Greenbelt, Maryland, digitizing engineering records for the National Space Data Archive. Her current assignment was a delivery of paper and tape that had come to the government in 2019 when an aerospace firm called Callaway Reeve dissolved and its contract holdings reverted under a closeout clause. The boxes had sat in a warehouse in Virginia for 5 years. In 2024, they were released. In 2025, they reached her desk. There were 406 boxes. 61 of them were labeled Halcyon. "I've been scanning these for 11 weeks, Marisol wrote. "Your initials are on more pages than anyone else's. I read the mishap report because I wanted to know what I was looking at. Then I went back and looked at the tape inventory. Ms. Nwosu, the board worked from a contractor summary. The raw decommutated telemetry was never released to them. It was held under a data rights clause. It's in box 44. It has never been opened. The seal is from January 2006. I don't know if this means anything. I'm not an engineer. But it seemed wrong that you don't have it, and I do." Adaeze read it 4 times. Then she got up and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, which was dark, and at the neighbor's security light, which was not, and she waited to see what she was going to feel. What she felt, mostly, was tired. She had spent 19 years learning not to hope about this. It had been a long education, and an expensive one, and she was not eager to throw it away for a stranger's email at midnight. She sat back down and typed, "Thank you. Yes. Please send everything." Then she added a second line, and looked at it, and deleted it, and typed it again. "Please send it before anyone asks you not to." To understand what happened at the kitchen table, you have to understand what Adaeze Nwosu was in the summer of 2005. She was the daughter of 2 people from Enugu who had come to Baltimore in 1976, with 3 suitcases and a chemistry degree between them. Her mother cleaned surgical instruments at Johns Hopkins for 11 years, before anyone would look at her transcript. Her father taught high school algebra for 31 years and never once, in all that time, came home and said a discouraging word about it in front of the children. Adaeze was good at exactly one thing when she was young, and she was very good at it. She could look at a column of numbers and see where it was lying, not where it was wrong. Anyone can find wrong. She could find the place where a set of numbers had been made to look reasonable. She went to Maryland on scholarship. She went to Michigan for her master's. In 2003, she was hired onto the Halcyon project as a telemetry systems engineer, which is a formal title for a person who spends her days making sure that the numbers a spacecraft sends home mean what everyone thinks they mean. The Mars Halcyon lander was going to Arcadia Planitia, a flat northern plain where the ice starts about 1.5 meters down. It carried a drill, a small chemistry laboratory, a weather station, and a camera. It cost $1.5 billion. It represented 11 years of work by roughly 400 people, and the professional hopes of at least 50 of them. Adayeze was one of the youngest engineers with sign-off authority on the flight team. She was also the only black woman in most of the rooms she worked in, which was a fact she had made her peace with the way you make peace with the weather. It was not the thing that defined her days. But it did mean that when she spoke, she had learned to be right the first time, because there was rarely a second one on offer. Her son was born in July of 2005, 5 weeks after launch. She named him Obiora, after her father's brother, and called him Obi, and she was back at her desk in 11 days because the cruise phase does not care about anybody's personal life. His father was an engineer too, on a different program, and he was decent about it for a while, and then he was not. And by the time Obi was 3, that was over, and had stopped being interesting to anyone but the two of them. So there she was. 26 years old, 6 months a mother, working 80 hours a week, sleeping in a chair in the corner of the operations building on the nights when there was nothing to go home for. The landing was January 12, 2006. Everyone who works in that business will tell you the same thing about entry, descent, and landing. It is the only part of the job where you cannot do anything. Everything is already loaded. Everything is already decided. The spacecraft is 11 light minutes away, which means that by the time you see the first sign of trouble, whatever caused it happened 11 minutes ago, and whatever it became is already over. You are not flying. You are watching a recording of something that has already finished happening. The room was full. Somebody's teenage daughter was in the back row. There were cameras. There was a table of grocery store cookies at the side of the room that nobody touched all night. The lander could not send the kind of full telemetry stream people imagined during the descent. Not one the room could watch parameter by parameter in real time. What the team followed live were tones, a carrier signal that shifted frequency at each milestone, the way a ship might sound its horn at markers in a channel. Beneath those tones, a low-rate engineering subcarrier was recorded for later decoding. Cruise stage separation, atmospheric entry, parachute deploy, heat shield separation, radar acquisition, powered descent, touchdown, 10 tones, 90 seconds from the first to the last. Adayeze was at the third console from the left, and her job that night was to call the tones. She called entry. She called parachute. Her voice on the recording is very calm, and when she listened to it later, years later in a bad period, she was surprised by how young she sounded, and how sure. She called radar acquisition at 11:42 and 19 seconds. She called powered descent. Then, nothing. The tone for touchdown did not come. They waited. There is a protocol for waiting, and they followed it. They waited through the nominal window. They waited through the extended window. Somebody said something quietly into a headset. The teenage daughter in the back row asked her father a question, and he did not answer it. At 11:52 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 minutes after the expected touchdown, the mission director declared loss of vehicle. His name was Warren Keel. He was 52 years old. He had run 3 missions before this one, 2 of them successfully, and he was well liked. He said the words in a flat voice, and then he said, "Thank you, everybody," and then he stood up and walked out of the room, and the room did what rooms do, which is that people began to make themselves useful in small, unnecessary ways, so that they would not have to sit still. Adayeze stayed at her console until 3 in the morning. She was not doing anything by then. She was simply sitting in front of a screen that showed nothing at all. At some point, a senior engineer named Ruth Baptiste, 61, 30 years in the business, the person on the team who most reliably remembered that everyone in the room was a human being, put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go home to your baby." Adayeze said, "In a minute." She did not know it then, but that was the last night she would ever work on a spacecraft. The mishap investigation ran for 14 months. This is the part of the story that people find hardest to believe, and it is also the part that is most ordinary. Nobody conspired. Nobody lied outright. What happened to Adayeze Nwosu happened the way most bad institutional outcomes happen, which is slowly, in daylight, with everyone acting reasonably according to the pressures on them. The board needed a cause. It needed a cause because Congress needed a cause, and the press needed a cause, and 400 people needed to know whether the next mission was going to be canceled, and we do not know is a true answer that no one is able to use. The physical evidence was almost nothing, 90 seconds of tones. No wreckage anyone could see, no orbital imagery good enough, at that time, to find a small object on a plane the size of Nevada. What the board had, mostly, was paperwork. And in the paperwork was a parameter table. It was called LRA-7, the Landing Radar Acquisition Table. It told the flight software what altitude range to trust from the radar during the final descent, and it had been revised 4 times during cruise because of a known sensitivity in the radar's response over certain terrain. The final revision was verified and signed on November 8, 2005. Verifier's initials, AN. The board's theory was elegant, and it fit. If the acquisition floor in LRA-7 had been set too high, the flight software might have rejected valid radar returns in the last moments, concluded it was still airborne, and cut the descent engines early, dropping the lander from 40 meters. That would be consistent with a normal powered descent tone, followed by no touchdown tone. It would also be consistent with 14 other things. The board said so, in a paragraph on page 88 that almost nobody read. But LRA-7 was the only candidate cause with a name attached to it. The report was released in April 2007. The finding was worded with great care. The board considers a parameter verification error in table LRA-7 to be the most probable proximate cause, though the board notes that the available data does not permit conclusive determination. Nobody quoted the second half of that sentence. Not the trade press, not the wire services, not the 2 members of Congress who mentioned it in a hearing. What survived, in the way that things survive, was much simpler than the report. A young engineer signed off on a bad number, and a billion-dollar lander fell out of the sky. Adayeze was not fired. That is not how it works. She was reassigned in June 2007 to a systems verification group. In February 2008, her position was not renewed in a reorganization. In 2008 and 2009, she applied to 19 jobs in the field and got 4 interviews and no offers. And in the last of those interviews, a decent man across the table looked at her resume for a while and finally said, not unkindly, "Miss Nwosu, I want you to understand that this isn't about your ability." She said, "I understand." She did understand. That was the worst part. In 2010, she took a job at Ardmore Mutual, testing insurance software in Houston. She was very good at it. Over the next 15 years, she became the person that company called when a statistical model was producing results that looked reasonable and were not. She built tools for pulling faint patterns out of noisy claim data. She got quietly, unglamorously excellent at exactly one thing, for the second time in her life, finding the truth in a data set that had been made to look fine. She raised her son. She paid off a house. She coached a middle school robotics team for 6 years and never once told them what she used to do. Obi grew up thinking his mother had worked at a space company for a while, before. She never corrected it. She told herself she was protecting him. She was protecting herself. She knew that. She just could not find the day on which it would have been easier to say it than not to. The files came in 14 transfers over 2 days. Adayeze took a week of vacation she had been carrying since 2019 and told nobody why. She cleared the dining room table, which had not been cleared for anything in years, and set up 2 monitors and a hard drive, and she started at the beginning like a person who had all the time in the world, which after 19 years she supposed she did. Box 44 held the raw, decommutated telemetry from the descent. Not the contractor's summary, not the processed plots that had gone to the board. The actual frame-by-frame engineering data, recovered from the carrier modulation, every parameter the lander had reported in its final 90 seconds, at the rate it had reported it. She had asked for this in 2006. 3 times. The answers had been, in order. It was proprietary, it was being processed, and it was not going to change the board's finding. She opened it at 6:15 on a Wednesday evening. She did not look at LRA7 first. That surprised her about herself. She started at entry, the way she would have on console, and she walked forward through the 90 seconds 1 milestone at a time, calling them silently in her head, the way she had called them out loud when she was 26. Entry. Nominal. Peak deceleration. Nominal, within half a G of prediction. Parachute deploy. Nominal. Heat shield separation. Nominal. Radar acquisition at 11:42 and 19 seconds. Exactly as she had called it, and the radar acquired, and she sat back in the chair so fast that it rolled. The radar had acquired. Not just acquired, it had held lock. Every frame, all the way down. 206 consecutive valid returns. If LRA7 had been set wrong, the flight software would have thrown those returns away. There would be a rejection flag. There would be a gap. There was no flag. There was no gap. She scrolled forward with the trackpad and her hand was not steady. Powered descent initiation. Nominal. Throttle profile. She pulled it into a plot, and the curve came up on the left monitor, and it was the most beautiful thing she had seen in 19 years. It was a textbook descent. It looked like the simulation. It looked like the picture in the training manual. Altitude 40 meters. Descent rate 2.1 meters per second. Altitude 12 meters. Altitude 4 meters. Engine cutoff command at 1.1 meters. Touchdown detection, true. Vertical velocity at contact, 1.9 meters per second. Tilt after settling, 2.3 degrees. Adaeze Nwosu put both hands flat on her dining room table and did not move for a long time. The Halcyon lander had landed. It had landed softly, on a nearly level surface, at less than 5 miles an hour, with everything working, exactly the way 400 people had spent 11 years designing it to. And then, 41 seconds later, the telemetry ended. Here is the thing that nobody in that operations room thought about at 11:44 p.m. on January 11, 2006, because they were watching for a tone that did not come, and human beings are not built to think clearly while they are doing that. The lander was supposed to go quiet. It was in the design. It had been in the design for 6 years. Adaeze had reviewed it herself. After touchdown, the lander stopped transmitting the descent semaphore tones and entered what the documents called the post-landing quiet period. For 38 minutes, it would do nothing but take care of itself, stabilize its temperatures, check its own systems, and unfold 3 solar array petals. Deploying arrays takes power and takes time, and the engineers had decided, correctly, that the machine should not be trying to talk while it was doing the one thing that determined whether it would live. At touchdown plus 38 minutes, it would begin a low-rate beacon, not a data downlink, a beacon, a small, patient signal that said one of 4 things, over and over, for 40 minutes. I am healthy. I am degraded. I am in trouble. I am alive, but I do not know where I am. 4 tones. 40 minutes. And then it would stop and wait for the next scheduled pass. The beacon was faint. Very faint. A 5.5-watt transmitter whispering across 111 million miles. Spread across a bandwidth the flight software could not narrow because it did not yet know its own Doppler. To hear it, you needed the biggest ear in the world. You needed DSS-14, the 70-meter dish at Goldstone, out in the Mojave, more than 200 feet across, built to hear a spacecraft whisper from the edge of the solar system. DSS-14 had been reserved for that window for 2 years. It was on the schedule. It was in the plan. It was the entire reason the quiet period was safe to have. Adeze went looking for what DSS-14 had been doing between 12:22 and 1:02 in the morning on January 12, 2006. It took her 2 days, because Deep Space Network scheduling records from that period are not in the same archive as mission telemetry, and because at one point she had to call a retired scheduler in Barstow who was extremely helpful and extremely hard of hearing. She found it on a Friday afternoon. At 12:06 a.m., 14 minutes after loss of vehicle was declared and 16 minutes before the beacon window opened, DSS-14 was released from Halcyon support and retasked to a heliophysics observatory called Corvus, which had entered a safe mode fault 6 hours earlier and was burning through its reserve. The release authorization had one signature on it: W. Kyle, Mission Director. Adeze looked at that signature for a long time and waited, again, to see what she was going to feel. What she felt, this time, was something worse than anger, and she had to sit with it a while before she could name it. It was recognition. Because she knew what that call had looked like from the inside. She could see the room. A man who had just lost his spacecraft in front of cameras, standing in a corridor at midnight, being told that another program had a real emergency and needed the big dish, and that his own asset was dead. She knew exactly what he had told himself. There's nothing left to listen to. He was not a criminal. He was a tired man who had concluded something 8 minutes too early, and then acted on his conclusion 14 minutes after that. The lander began transmitting at 12:22 a.m. The 70-meter dish was pointed at the sun. There was one more thing, and Adeze almost did not look for it, and if she had not looked for it, this story would end here as a very sad piece of arithmetic and nothing more. DSS-14 was released, but it was not the only antenna that had been assigned to the landing. DSS-24, a 34-meter dish about a mile away across the same desert valley, had been scheduled as a backup and as an open-loop recorder. Open-loop recording is exactly what it sounds like. The antenna does not try to interpret anything. It simply writes down the raw radio spectrum in a band around the expected frequency, everything, noise and all, onto tape, in case somebody someday wants to look at it. DSS-24's assignment ran until 2 a.m. Nobody released it. Nobody thought about it. It was a low-priority radio science task on the schedule, and in the confusion of a lost mission, low-priority tasks simply run out their clocks. So from 11:44 p.m. until 2 in the morning, a 34-meter dish in the Mojave Desert sat pointed at Arcadia Planitia, recording the sound of what everyone believed was an empty patch of sky. Those tapes had been converted to digital archive files in 2011 as part of a routine media migration program. They were in the public archive. They had been in the public archive for 14 years. They had been downloaded according to the access log twice, both times by graduate students who were clearly after something else and gave up in under an hour. Nobody had processed them because there was nothing to process. You do not search for a signal from a spacecraft that does not exist. And even if someone had tried in 2006, they would have failed. A 34-meter dish is less than a quarter the collecting area of a 70-meter. The beacon would have been well below the noise. You could not have seen it on a spectrum display. You could not have seen it with the tools of that decade. To pull it out, you would need to know the exact frequency, correct for the Doppler shift of two planets moving with respect to each other, and then integrate coherently over many minutes to build the faint thing up out of the noise a little at a time. That is a hard problem in radio astronomy. It is also, almost exactly, the problem of finding a real pattern in 15 years of noisy insurance claim data. Adeze Nwosu had been doing this for a living, 5 days a week, since 2010. She spent 9 days writing the processor. She used her own laptop and a rented cloud instance she paid for on a personal credit card, because the thought of asking anyone for anything made her hands go cold. She had the Doppler model. she had the predicted landing ellipse. She had the frequency plan from Box 44, which nobody had ever released before, which meant that she was the first person in 19 years who could have done this even if they had wanted to. She ran it for the first time on a Sunday morning at 5:40, and it failed, because she had a sign error in the Doppler correction. She found it at 9. She ran it again at 9:20. At 9:31 the screen finished drawing, and there in the middle of a field of gray noise was a bright, narrow, unmistakable line. A carrier. Right frequency. Right Doppler. Right place in the sky. It started at 12:22:04 a.m. It ran for 39 minutes and 51 seconds. And when she decoded the tone pattern, 4 states, cycling, it was not the healthy tone. It was the fourth one. I am alive, and I do not know where I am. Which was exactly correct. The lander had landed safely and had no way to determine its own coordinates without a ground contact. It was a machine sitting in the dark on a frozen plain, in perfect working order, calling out the only honest thing it could say. Adaeze Nwosu sat in a chair in a house in Sugar Land, Texas, at 9:31 on a Sunday morning, listening to a spacecraft that had been declared dead in front of her when she was 26 years old, and she put her face in her hands. Her son found her like that 20 minutes later. Obi Nwosu was 20. He was a sophomore at the University of Houston, studying history, and he had come home for the weekend to do laundry, which is the actual reason 20-year-olds come home for weekends. He stood in the doorway holding a basket and said, "Mom?" She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, which is a thing she had done since she was a girl, and said, "I'm all right." "You're not." "No," she agreed. "But I am." He put the basket down. She had rehearsed this conversation for 19 years and had never once gotten past the first sentence, and now here it was, and she had no plan at all. So she just said it. "When you were 6 months old, I helped land a spacecraft on Mars. It went wrong. The report said it was my fault. It ended my career. I have never told you, because I could not think of a way to say it that did not sound like an excuse." Obi did not say anything. He came around the table and looked at the 2 monitors, at the bright line in the gray field, and at the plot of a throttle profile that was the most textbook descent anyone had ever flown. "What am I looking at?" "That," she said, "is the lander, 40 minutes after everyone said it crashed. Saying hello." He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he said, "You were 26. "Yes, I'm 20. "I know. They put your name in a report when you were 26 and you just carried it? For my whole life?" And this is where Adaeze Nwosu discovered a thing she had not planned on, which is that her son was angry, and that his anger was not on her behalf in the way she had imagined. It was closer than that, and harder. "You told me you worked at a space company for a while," he said. "That's what you said, for a while." "Yes. Mom, I did a science fair project on Mars landers in the 7th grade. She had helped him with it. She remembered every evening of it. She had let him do the research himself and had corrected exactly 2 numbers. "I know," she said. "Why didn't you tell me?" She thought about giving him the answer she had prepared, which was about protecting him, and she found that in the presence of an actual carrier signal at 8,415 megahertz, she could not make herself say a false thing. "Because you would have believed me," she said, "and I did not know what I was going to do if the one person who believed me was wrong." Obi sat down. They sat there for a while, and the regression suite finished on the other laptop, and neither of them looked at it. Finally, he said, "So what do we do?" She noticed the word. She would think about that word many times over the following year. "There's a man in California," she said, "and I have to go talk to him." Warren Keel was 71. He lived in a small stucco house in Altadena with a lemon tree in the front yard that had gotten away from him, and he answered his own door. He had gotten old the way engineers get old, which is all at once and mostly in the shoulders. He looked at her and did not recognize her, and then he did. and something moved across his face that she could not read and did not try to. "Ms. Nwosu," he said. "Dr. Keel." He stood there. "I'd like 20 minutes, she said. "I'm not recording. I don't have a lawyer. I'm not writing anything about you." He stepped back from the door. The house was very tidy. There were framed mission patches on one wall, 7 of them, arranged in 2 rows, and there was a conspicuous gap in the second row where an 8th would have gone. She noticed it. He saw her notice it. Neither of them said anything about it, then or ever. She set her laptop on his dining table and turned it toward him and did not say a word for 11 minutes while he looked. She had learned that from her father. When you are certain, be quiet. Let the thing be the thing. He went through the descent data first, the way she had, milestone by milestone. He was still an engineer. His finger moved along the screen. When he got to the touchdown detection flag, he stopped, and stayed stopped for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he looked at the beacon plot. He looked at the frequency, and the Doppler curve, and the timestamp. Then he sat back. 12:22, he said. Yes. I released 14 at 12:06. Yes. He nodded slowly, several times, as if agreeing with someone who was not in the room. Corvus was in safe mode, he said. It had a battery problem. It had 11 hours. I know. I read the whole file. Corvus recovered. It flew for another 6 years. Yes, he said. It did. He was quiet. I want to tell you, he said finally, that I have thought about that night for 19 years, and in all that thinking, I never once thought about the quiet period. Not one time. I want you to understand how strange that is to me. I wrote the requirement review for it, I approved it, it was my requirement. I've thought about that too, Adeze said. I don't think it's strange. He looked up. I think you concluded it was dead at 11:52, she said. And after that, every fact you had went into a different bin. It wasn't a decision, it was a category error, and it happened in about 8 minutes, and after that, everything you did was consistent. He absorbed that. That's a generous account, he said. It isn't generous. It's just what I think happened. I've spent 15 years watching people do it with insurance data. It's the most common failure there is. Someone decides what a thing is, and then they stop being able to see it. Keel rubbed his face with one hand. LRA 7, he said. Yes. I pushed for that. I know you did. I've read the board transcripts. You weren't the only one, but you were the loudest. Do you want to know why? I think I do. He looked at the gap in the second row of patches. Because it was a cause, he said. Because if we came back with unknown, the follow-on mission was gone, and 400 people were going to be on the street inside a year, and I had a room full of them who were 31, 34, 38 years old, with houses. He stopped, and because it was not me, Adeze did not say anything. You were 26, Keel said. You were the newest name with a signature on anything. You did not have a program behind you. You did not have a laboratory behind you. He met her eyes and did not look away, which she would give him credit for later. And I want to be honest with you, because I have had 19 years to be honest with myself, and I have gotten most of the way there. You were also the person on that team that I believed would have the least trouble being reassigned. And I have never been able to construct a version of why I believed that which I am willing to say out loud in my own kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. All right, Adeze said. That's all you're going to say? Dr. Keel, I did not come here for an apology. I've had one from you in my head about 900 times, and none of them helped. She closed the laptop. I came because I am going to publish this, and I wanted you to hear it from me first, in a room, instead of from a reporter on the telephone. He looked at her. Why? Because I was not raised to do it the other way. Warren Keel put both hands on his dining table, in his small, tidy house, under 7 mission patches. What do you need from me? He said. Your signature, she said, on a statement that the board never received the raw telemetry. That's all. Not an apology, not a confession, a fact. That's all? That's the only part, she said. That helps anybody. He wrote it out longhand at his own table while she waited, and signed it, and he did not ask to read what she was going to write, and he did not ask her to soften anything, and when she got to the door he said her name once. She turned around. It landed, he said. Yes, she said. It landed beautifully. She did not sue anybody. She could have. 2 attorneys called her, unsolicited, within a month of the paper going up, and both of them used the word career destruction, and one of them used a number with 7 digits in it. She thanked them and did not call back. She did not go on television, though she was asked 11 times in the first 6 weeks. She did one interview with a science reporter at a wire service who had covered the original mishap in 2007 and who called her personally to say that he had written 3 of the stories that had ruined her and that he would like very much to write a 4th. She did not at any point use the word vindication, and when other people used it, she changed the subject. What she did was this. In May, she posted a preprint, 41 pages, with all the data and all the code and every step of the processing chain laid out so that anyone with a laptop could run it and check her. She listed Marisol Tejada as a co-author over Marisol's objection, because Marisol had done the one thing without which none of it existed, which was to notice a name on a page and decide it mattered. The title was not dramatic. It was Recovery of a Post-Landing Beacon Signal from Archived Open-Loop Recordings, Mars Halcyon Lander, 12 January 2006. The abstract ended with a sentence that people would quote for a long time afterward, mostly because of how flat it is. We conclude that the vehicle completed a nominal landing and remained operational for at least 40 minutes thereafter. And in Section 9, she gave coordinates. From the Doppler curve of the beacon and the timing and the descent state vector out of box 44, she solved for where the lander had actually come to rest, and she published it to a box a little over a kilometer on a side, in Arcadia Planitia, at 46.9 degrees north. Then she went back to work at the insurance company, because she had a mortgage, and because the request she had made to the orbiter imaging team was going to take a while. Imaging requests on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter go into a queue. The camera is extraordinary. It can resolve something the size of a kitchen table from 200 miles up, but the spacecraft passes over any given spot only occasionally, and the science community has been waiting in line for a long time. Her request went in on May 19th. It was accepted in September, after a review panel that Adiaze was not present for and about which she has never asked a single question. The first attempt, in February, was lost to a regional dust event. The second attempt, in June, produced an image with a data gap directly across the northern third of the target box, which is the kind of thing that happens and which nobody could do anything about, and which Adiaze took, by her own account, poorly, for about a day. The third attempt was on the morning of July 14th. She did not know it was happening. That is a detail she likes. She was at her desk at Ardmore Mutual, reviewing a claims model validation report, and it was raining in Houston in the way it does in July, all at once and then not. The email came at 3:41 in the afternoon. The subject line said, "We got it." She opened the attachment. It was a grayscale image, tinted the color of a paper bag, and at first it was nothing, the flat, mottled, uninteresting surface of a plane on another planet, which, if you have not spent time looking at such things, is genuinely difficult to make sense of. Then the eye finds it. A small, bright object, casting a shadow. Around it, a dark halo where the descent engines had blown the fine dust away more than 20 years earlier, and it had never fully come back. And from the object, 3 shapes extending outward at even angles, like the petals of something. The solar arrays were deployed, all 3 of them, 1,400 meters to the southeast, a second bright object and a long pale smear, the back shell and the parachute, lying where it had fallen. 900 meters north, the heat shield. Everything where it should be. Everything in the pattern of a landing that worked. Adaize Nwosu sat at a desk in an insurance office in Houston, Texas, and looked at a photograph of a machine standing upright on a frozen plain 140 million miles away, with its arms open, covered in more than 20 years of dust, exactly where she said it would be. A colleague passing her cubicle asked if she was all right. She said, "Yes, thank you, I'm fine." Then she went out to her car in the parking garage and sat in it for 40 minutes. The engineering reconstruction continued in parallel for another year, and it produced the last piece, which is the one that people find hardest to hear. The lander, having landed, having deployed its arrays, having received no ground contact, would have executed its fault protection sequence exactly as designed. Beacon at 40-minute intervals, then hourly, then twice daily, then once daily, with a progressive frequency search, because the flight software was written by people who had thought carefully about what a lost machine should do and had decided that it should keep trying. Power would have held for a long time. Arcadia Planitia is a clean site. The dust falls slowly. The batteries were good. The best reconstruction says the lander had usable power for somewhere between 7 and 9 months, and that its transmitter would have been the last major system to fail. 211 days is the figure in the final report. It is a conservative estimate. For 211 days, a small American machine sat on a plane on Mars in perfect working order and called home once a day, on schedule, into a sky where nobody was pointed at it. Nobody was listening. Not because anyone was careless in that moment, but because 8 minutes of silence in one room on one January night had convinced everyone there was nothing left to hear, and once a thing has been decided, it stays decided. The lander never knew that. It went through its sequence. It searched its frequencies. It sent the only honest tone it had. I am alive, and I do not know where I am. 211 times, at least. And then, some morning in the northern summer of 2006, it did not have enough power to try again, and it stopped, and it has been standing there ever since with its arms open. The addendum to the mishap report was published in the autumn, 19.5 years after the original. It is 11 pages. It is written in the flattest language the English possesses, which is the language institutions use when they are correcting themselves and would prefer not to bleed. Finding 1. The vehicle completed a nominal landing. Finding 2. The proximate cause determination of the 2007 board is withdrawn. Finding 3. The board did not receive the raw decommutated telemetry, which was withheld under a contractor data rights clause, and the board's finding rested on a summary product. Finding 4. The release of DSS-14 at 0006 UTC-8 on 12 January 2006 removed the only asset capable of receiving the post-landing beacon. Finding 5, and this is the one Adaize read most often, states that no error has been identified in parameter table LRA7 and that the verification performed on 8 November 2005 was correct. Her name is in the addendum twice. Once in Finding 5, once in the acknowledgments. There were procedural changes, and they are the sort of thing that will never be in a headline and will matter for 50 years. Raw flight data can no longer be withheld from a mishap board under any commercial clause. Loss of vehicle declarations now carry a mandatory listening period tied to the vehicle's own fault protection design rather than to the judgment of a tired person in a corridor. Open-loop recordings from any anomalous event are now flagged for processing rather than filed. And there is one line, added at the request of an engineer whose name is not on it, that appears at the front of the Mishap Investigation Handbook. The absence of a signal is not evidence of the absence of a spacecraft. Warren Keel sent her a letter when the addendum came out. 2 paragraphs, handwritten, and she has never told anyone what was in it. She has said only that the second paragraph was about his own father, and that she read it twice and put it in a drawer, and that she does not intend to answer it, and that this is not because of anger. He died the following spring. She went to the service. She sat in the back. Afterward, his daughter found her in the parking lot and shook her hand and said, "He talked about you." And Adeze said, "I'm sorry for your loss," and meant it, and drove to the airport. She did not go back. That surprises people. 3 laboratories made her offers within a year, one of them very good, and she turned all 3 down and stayed at Ardmore Mutual, where she is now a principal engineer and where she runs a small group. Her reason is not bitterness. She has explained it exactly once, to a graduate student who asked her about it after a talk, and what she said was this: "I'm 48. I would have been walking into rooms full of people who knew that story, and I would have spent the rest of my working life being the woman it happened to. I already did 19 years as a person defined by that landing. I'm not doing another 19 as the other version." She does 3 or 4 talks a year now, mostly at state schools and community colleges, and she never talks about vindication, and she never talks about persistence, both of which she considers to be the wrong lesson, and, worse, a comfortable one. What she talks about is the tape. She tells them that the answer was in the public archive for 14 years, free, downloadable, sitting there the entire time, with an access count of 2. She tells them that nobody was hiding it, that there was no conspiracy, no shredder, no locked room, that the most complete evidence of a successful American landing on Mars sat on a public server for 14 years and nobody looked at it, for the simplest and most human reason there is. Because everyone already knew what had happened. And then she says the thing that the students write down. Somebody in this room is going to spend their career being the person who checks the thing everybody already knows. It is not glamorous work. Nobody schedules a press conference for it. But every serious error I have ever found, every single one, in 25 years, in spacecraft and in insurance and in my own life, was not hidden. It was just filed under the wrong name. Obi Nwosu graduated in the spring. He did not switch to engineering. He finished his history degree and went on for a master's in archival science, which he chose, he says, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, and which his mother says is the least convincing thing her son has ever told her. He gave her a framed print for her 50th birthday. It is the July 14 image, enlarged, the lander at the center with its 3 arms open and its long, thin shadow lying across the dust. He had it printed properly, on good paper, and he wrote the caption himself and had it set in small type under the frame, and it does not say anything about a mother or a son or 19 years. It says, Mars Halcyon Lander, Arcadia Planitia, landed 12 January 2006, 0744 UTC. Transmitted at least 211 days, located 2026. It hangs in the hallway of a house in Sugar Land, Texas, between the bathroom and the linen closet, where you cannot miss it, and where nobody makes a ceremony out of it, which is exactly how she wanted it. She walks past it every morning. And on some of those mornings, not most of them, but some, Adeze Nwosu stops in the hallway in her work clothes with her keys already in her hand and looks at a small machine standing upright on a frozen plain 140 million miles away and thinks about the 211 days it spent calling out to a sky where nobody was pointed at it. And she thinks, I know exactly what that is like. I heard you. It only took me 19 years, and I am sorry it took that long, and I want you to know that I have not stopped listening since. Then she picks up her bag and goes to work, because the machine kept sending. 211 days, with no evidence at all that anyone would ever hear it, on the chance that somebody someday might. That is the whole of it. That is the entire lesson, and it took $1.5 billion and 19 years and one woman at a kitchen table to arrive at something that plain, keep sending. Somebody may be a long time coming, but the record is patient, and the truth does not decay, and one day a stranger in Maryland opens a box that nobody has opened, and sees a name on a page, and decides that it matters.